Back before superhero movies were violent and R-rated on a regular basis, there was the movie that we are going to be discussing today, that being Matthew Vaughn's 2010 Kick-Ass.
Phones, money.
We see someone in trouble and wish we could help,
You looking at?
but we don't. How come nobody's ever tried to be a superhero?
You wanna go fight some crime?
Let's see what you can do.
Oh, that kind of hurt.
Costume vigilante has become the latest internet phenomenon.
Bring it on!
You're crazy, kid.
Hey, I got one of those.
Who are you? Kick-Ass.
Red Mist.
I'm Hit Girl, and that's Big Daddy.
Folks have just had enough of living in fear, you know.
I gotta send a message that being a superhero is bad for your health.
This guy comes out of nowhere.
Playtime's over, kid.
I never play.
Oh, yeah. Didn't see that, did ya?
Kick-Ass.
That's right, we're superheroes. You love us.
This is the Superhero Pantheon. On this podcast, we take one superhero film a week and decide whether it should be in the Pantheon, the pile of shame, or somewhere in between. My name is Jerome Huson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. You can find additional episodes of this podcast, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast apps through the real world. We strongly encourage you to leave a 4 or 5 star review so as to help people discover this show and the great work that the folks at The Real World are doing. If you would like to interact with us or send feedback, you could do so by following us on Twitter at Hero Pantheon. My co-host for this week and every week will be the newly half-vaccinated Brian DeBrain. He can be found on Twitter at Brian DeBrain. Brian, as we are recording this, you are now half-vaccinated. And by the time people are listening to this episode, I will probably be fully vaccinated. So we are both moving one step closer into a greater world.
I don't know if normalcy is the word, but we're getting there. We're definitely getting there. Hopefully it's not a flag smasher type situation where some people are going to go crazy and want things to go back to the way it was during the pandemic, because that definitely would suck. But that's just kind of some Marvel tie-ins right there. But yeah, this is an interesting throwback to 2010, a different time for sure. I mean, we only had like 2 MCU movies at the time, so that's kind of crazy. But also, like, looking back at the cast and what the cast has been able to do since then, not exactly A-list stuff, but Aaron Taylor Johnson's going to, he's going to Godzilla and other things. Of course, Pietro, and then we got, of course, Evan Peters, also Pietro, Fake-tro. So just weird stuff going on and how everything kind of ties back to here in Kick-Ass. Matthew Vaughn, of course, this launched him into getting the First Class gig. So I think this movie kind of is like a cool little historical note in time, I want to say. This was kind of, I don't know if it was a renaissance for Nicolas Cage or whatnot, but I think this was before people kind of started booking him just to do like crazy one-off straight to DVD horror action movies or whatever. Like for the last decade, I feel like he's been doing that. This is kind of like his last hurrah in a major theatrical feature, it feels like, kind of. Like, he wasn't so over the top here, so, I mean, he is doing an Adam West impression, but still, like, he wasn't so over the top in this, I feel. So, just a crazy look at at 2010 and the way we were talking and how there's some gay panic in here for sure. And if there was definitely going to be some rewrites in today's 2021, there would definitely be rewrites about that. But it's cool to see, like, Matthew Vaughn co-wrote this, co-written by a woman, so that's also cool. A lot of cool things about this movie. It's a lot of shock and awe, but a lot of good shock and awe, I think, where it's like you're so shocked by the violence that you somehow start laughing at it because it's so ridiculous.
So this is a movie that definitely had some issues being funded, and part of it is because superhero movies were not the thing that literally everyone just wanted. So what ended up happening is that Matthew Vaughn ended up kind of financing this himself, raising the budget independently, and then selling the movie to Universal. for more than he originally asked them for. And this also ended up at Lionsgate Studios too. One of the things that the producers of the movie wanted from other studios, they tried to get this funded, and a lot of the issues came with Hit Girl. Hit Girl is, of course, very young. Chloe Grace Moretz in this movie is like 10 or 11 years old, and basically a lot of what they wanted was to either drop Hit Girl or make her older, so that maybe it's not a good thing for the studios to want a little girl to be using the C word, as Chloe Moretz ends up using in this movie. But I think that kind of takes away some of the charm of this movie, and I think that I think she gives one of the strongest performances, quite frankly, in this movie. And part of me wonders if the movie wouldn't be better off if it wasn't just about her and her father. So, of course, Matthew Vaughn became involved with Kick-Ass, apparently because of his reaction to not getting the directing gig for another superhero movie that we will be reviewing later on this month, that being 2008's Hancock, which I think we've discussed so much on this show. It's remarkable that we have not reviewed it yet, but that is finally going to be rectified later on this month. So yeah, Matthew Vaughn is a very interesting figure, of course. We talked about him a great deal with X-Men First Class. He has since gone on to kind of godfather and direct the movies in the Kingsman franchise, and there are rumors he may return back to Kick-Ass at some point. But right now, he is really engraved in the Kingsman franchise.
Yeah, as I look back, it turns out I've seen every single one of his movies, including Layer Cake, and I know it's kind of an obscure title, Layer Cake. Back in high school, I was kind of obsessed with going to my local Lemley theater and watching all the independent stuff. This trailer came on for Layer Cake. It seemed like a UK gangster movie in the vein of like a Guy Ritchie type movie, so I was intrigued. I did not understand almost anything in that movie except maybe a drug deal in that movie. Daniel Craig's in it. It's a fun cast. Michael Gambon's in it. But it's very well directed, even though I have no clue what is happening in that movie. I haven't seen it since, and I probably won't, but all I came out thinking was like, God, the director of this movie was just really good, but I don't know about the script. So, that's kind of his vibe. And I'm not really a big fan of Stardust, but I know a lot of people are. It's a fantasy movie he directed. He had a lot of fun with it, and visually it was cool. And I feel like Matthew Vaughn takes simple stuff or like basic scripts like this one. Like the script is not that great for this movie, even though it was adapted from the comic and everything. But I just feel like he directs action so well, and he takes simple scenes and makes them so interesting. And like I'm glad he's got the Kingsman franchise all to himself, but I kind of wanted to branch out a little more. Like I feel like with all these dozen or so Star Wars shows, I feel like he can kind of add some spice to one of those Star Wars shows and kind of spice it up with the action and the direction. But I feel like, he's kind of done his own thing the last 5 years with the Kingsman. And I'm definitely going to see the Kingsman, the Ralph Fiennes solo prequel, whenever it comes out. But because I actually like Kingsman too, and I know a lot of people don't, but I like it for what it was and the visual style of it all. And I just like his direction. So I'm a fan of this movie and his style, even though some movies I'm never going to watch again. But I do feel like Matthew Vaughn has like earned his way, and I do want him to come back to like Marvel and do something. Maybe DC, I don't know, but definitely he's got that Marvel feel to it when it comes to the action, like First Class, of course. But even in this movie, like he takes a $30 million budget and makes it look like fucking like 100. It feels like, and this is 2010, so think about that in terms of the money. So I mean, $30 million and the way this movie looks, incredible.
Nicolas Cage is arguably the biggest star of this movie, and he modeled many of his speech mannerisms as the character Big Daddy on the original Adam West 1966 Batman. And according to Matthew Vaughn, Cage started acting out his lines this way from the very first costume fitting. Vaughn was happy for Cage to continue with this performance in the film, citing his irritation with the gravelly voice Christian Bale used in The Dark Knight, and that has admittedly been some frustration with the both of us as well. But Nicolas Cage is very good in this movie, and I mean, quite frankly, he could be a national treasure, pun not intended. But I think the issue is that he just does a lot of very schlocky, crappy direct-to-DVD movies, and he's become the type of person that, unfortunately, if you pay him enough money, he would show up at the opening of an envelope, and it's kind of depressing because I think when his energy is channeled in the right direction, he's a really good performer. I mean, my God, the guy has won an Academy Award before and has given some very good performances in movies like Adaptation and other movies as such. But man, like, you look at the last 10 years and it is a graveyard of movies that were probably shot in Eastern Europe, and he got paid for 3 days of work for like $1 million.
Yeah, it is kind of depressing, but at the same time, it's kind of like, well, at least he's doing his own thing, right? Like, it feels like he's doing his own thing. He's not playing by anyone else's rules anymore, and like, or Hollywood's rules or whatever. I don't know if it's the money. Like, we've heard the rumors about his money issues and T-Rex bones and all kinds of exquisite purchases and stuff like that. That kind of put him into debt, and that's why he's taking all this money. But I don't know if he's like financially past that at this point. I don't want to speculate, but let him be him, I guess, at this point. He's kind of earned it. Like, I mean, at this point, if he comes and does like a Marvel movie, I think people will love him as like Mephisto. Fuck it. Why not? Like, at this point, he can almost do whatever he wants, and he can go off to Eastern Europe and do these crazy horror movies, or, interact with animatronic music playing bears in whatever movie that came out last year. He does all kinds of crazy shit, but, he's willing to go the extra mile for it, So at least credit him for that, I think. So, yes, he's obscure and, crazy in terms of his performances, but, he goes for it. So, and you just need the right director to channel it. I think you're right on that one.
So, of course, this movie got a bit of a mention in Wandavision because, of course, Aaron Taylor Johnson and Evan Peters, two of the stars of this movie, they both played Pietro Maximoff, Quicksilver, in two different simultaneously produced franchises. Taylor Johnson is the official MCU version of Pietro, as he played the character in Avengers Age of Ultron, but was, of course, brutally murdered. Evan Peters portrayed the character in 20th Century Fox's X-Men Days of Future Past, X-Men Apocalypse, as well as Dark Phoenix, where he was quickly dispatched rather unceremoniously in a movie that we should never talk about again. But Evan Peters, of course, was also in the miniseries WandaVision. So both Peters and Taylor Johnson have played, are in the MCU, although I guess Evan Peters is not officially Quicksilver. He is a boner joke and a reference to a character that the director played on Growing Pains. That's what he is.
So allegedly that on-set line about kick-ass when Elizabeth Olsen says that, apparently they had no conscious clue that they were referencing Kick-Ass, allegedly, which I find kind of off, but I'm pretty sure someone on the set was like, hey, this is a reference to Kick-Ass, but they're kind of playing it like it wasn't, but the show's become so meta and weird that it probably was at this point. So, and it's just weird how things, like I said, come together in full circle, and I can just picture it's so weird too, because they're even shorter in this than they were because they were still growing. So, it's remarkable how they've even grown. Even Taylor Johnson, who fucking has grown, at least another couple inches since filming Kick-Ass, which is even crazier, because that dude is tall. And it's just weird to see, these kids grow, and then the whole MCU connection is so weird.
All right, let's get to the categories, and let's talk about the very problematic Dave Lazowski / Kick-Ass. Aaron Taylor Johnson, of course, is playing this character, and I think that when I first saw this in 2010, I really did not see the issues, and I think so much of this is I feel like I'm a much more aware person, and the difference between 25-year-old me seeing this movie and 35-year-old me seeing this movie, I mean, there's a lot of difference. They try to couch him as this vaguely nerdy average kid who doesn't really fit in anywhere. He has a couple of friends, but I feel like this is the type of person who at this point in 2021 would probably get into the 4chan and 8chan halls and, maybe become celibate by choice. That's what I feel. That's what I feel Dave Lazowski would end up being in 2021. I don't know about you, but just looking at him in this movie, I think the biggest issue is that he is very creepy and stalkerish to his potential love interest, Katie. And Katie is, of course, written to embrace him and become his romantic partner. But, like, there's gay confusion and then he kind of plays into it and is kind of keeping the secret from her, both being a superhero as well as being straight. It's weird, and boy, does it not work now. I guess it didn't work then, but it really doesn't work now.
Yeah, just different times and different culture, I guess. And yeah, it was 11 years ago, but we're very much, more woke now, obviously. And yeah, it's very kind of like weird and creepy, but I think in 2010, the writers, the audience was thinking he's just like, an awkward dude who doesn't know how to, interact with girls properly and stuff like that. And then, having that awkward or that awkward interaction where she thought he was or she was talking to him, but she wasn't, and shit like that. So the whole idea was sympathy and empathy. And then it kind of works a little bit, but then when he's pretending to be gay, that's when it kind of goes like, oh man, that's kind of like borderline, really fucked up territory. And you're not really thinking about it too much in 2010. Now it's pretty fucked up. So yeah, this is what I'm talking about when they definitely had some rewrite. I mean, if 2021 came around and this was like, we want to do Kick-Ass again, this was definitely going to be part of the rewrites for sure. It's not really integral to the plot per se. You can obviously just rewrite a teenage love story, in a more 2021 sensibility kind of way. But yeah, it was just kind of awkward. But there was some funny moments. But it feels like it's just like old school American Pie kind of humor that's kind of bleeds into the 2000s, early 2000s, late 2000s. So that's kind of what it feels like, that brand of humor. And it feels like we've kind of like moved on from that in terms of the comedies nowadays. So it's just, part of 2010 and it is what it is.
So he becomes a superhero. He decides that he wants to be a superhero, I guess. And he gets his ass kicked the very first time that he goes out, of course, and he gets stabbed in the midsection. And instead of being scared away, he decides to double down and further become a hero. And I guess part of the issue is, so the idea is that he gets stabbed and he gets some metal in his body and his nerve endings aren't as sensitive, and that's why he's able to continue being a hero. Is that how I'm to understand this?
I don't know, man. My buddy got into an accident and he had like major metal put in his hip and stuff like that, and he is not walking around like that for sure, and he did not recover that quickly. So when I'm watching this in my early 20s, not thinking about the consequences of like a major accident or getting hit by a car like that, yeah, it's just kind of weird. But they wanted some kind of, not necessarily a superpower, but something to give him some kind of edge. And they kind of illustrated that when his buddy Clark Duke is like smacking him with the fucking. Even I was laughing when he smacks him with the plastic tray. But that's totally like what your buddies got to do in high school. I can kind of picture that, like some of the boys kind of thing. Like if they find out that you're kind of not necessarily invincible, but like can take some pain, they're gonna fuck with you, and they definitely were fucking with him. So it does kind of add to his character a little bit, but without it, he's just a puny kid.
So, of course, Evan Peters is Todd and Clark Duke is Marty. And I think that they certainly do have a couple of moments, but I think that they definitely also play into some of the creepiness that is going on with Dave and Katie as well. So, I'm not sure how to necessarily feel about them, but I feel much better about the duo Chloe Grace Moretz as Hit Girl / Mindy and Nicolas Cage as Big Daddy / Damon. I guess Hit Girl's kind of a Disney princess because of Dead Mom, but I really like their dynamic. I think they have a really good chemistry together, and I'm just very appreciative of kind of the energy that they bring to this movie. I almost wish that the movie was about them.
Yeah, I think so too, because it feels like they're the heart of the movie, but they don't get introduced until like halfway through. But again, they're being faithful to the comic, and I get it. But it is what it is, because like if there's going to be a lot of pissed off comic book fans, but at least they got their story told really well. Bleeds into the second one. We can talk about that later on in the podcast, because the second one's really, really shitty. But at least her story kind of gets crossed over into the second one. Like by the end of the movie, it feels like it's her story. You know what I mean? Like it felt like Kick-Ass was kind of this red herring to who the true superheroes were in town, and it was those two. and like it feels like it's her story. It's like this, quasi Kill Bill, you know what I mean? Like revenge plot going on. Want to get back at the mob. Very much like Huntress in the Birds of Prey. So I liked it a lot, and the fact that she's 10 years old at the time and she's stealing the show. And when you have those roles like Kirsten Dunst in Interview with the Vampire, where you get to play an adult, but you're a kid and you're just, it's very awkward, but it's kind of this torture kind of thing. But for her, it's like she's a 10-year-old girl wanted to be this adult, and she kind of got robbed of her childhood, and it sucks, and that's kind of, they play into that. And there's a story with his partner, and the partner, adopting her for the first 5 years of her life when he was in jail. So basically the plot is, Big Daddy, Nicolas Cage gets framed, goes to jail for 5 years, and wants back because his wife, overdosed on some prescription medicine or whatever, blames her death on the mob. So there you go, revenge story. But it's just so compelling because their chemistry, their acting, and it feels like Nicolas Cage is not going over the top. He's under control. But even with the Adam West impression, I feel like he's still doing like some really compelling stuff because it feels like he's doing the Adam West shtick to cover up his pain. That's what it feels like to me, especially this viewing this time around, because it's very like, with Nicolas Cage and you stare in his eyes, you can kind of tell what's going on in his eyes, and that's what it feels like, especially when they're doing the flashback, him literally writing comics for her to read, to adapt for herself, to picture herself as a superhero, like shit like that. It's like he's very manipulative, and it's very like a sadistic kind of thing, raising your daughter this way, but at the same time, it's like a really compelling revenge story.
One thing I really liked is one of the very first times that we see them together is when he shoots her in the chest with the bullet, and she of course is wearing protection, but it's kind of this dark scene, and then it actually pays off later on when she gets shot and survives. So I like that there are those callbacks, and I really love I think legitimately one of the best scenes of the movie and of any action movie or any superhero movie where there's action. I think the Hit Girl, when she's going through the hallway and she's killing all those dudes, like I legitimately think that's one of the best action scenes that's been done in a superhero movie. And even beyond that, even though Kick-Ass is kind of sidelined, he does come back in the end. I think you get one of the better villain deaths of all time too. So I think that where this movie really works is with the action scenes. I think in a weird way, this is almost kind of a reverse Marvel movie in that the least compelling stuff takes place in the first two acts, and I think the movie actually really picks up in the last 30 minutes or so. I think once you get Nicolas Cage and Aaron Taylor Johnson's characters, once they've been captured, I think that's actually when the movie really picks up, and the intensity and the momentum really picks up, and the Hit Girl kind of comes into her own. So for me, I think the last act is actually what works a lot, and I think that for me, I really do like the Nicolas Cage performance, especially. I don't know what accent he's using when he is yelling at when he's yelling while he's being burned, but that really struck me, as well as kind of the last words that he says to his daughter before he dies, and I really like those two. Not really big into Aaron Taylor Johnson, kind of mixed on Evan Peters and Clark Duke's characters. So I'm going to give this a 7. And a lot of the reason that I'm not going with an 8 is because the main character of this movie is just not interesting to me. And for me, I think if the movie had been more about Hit Girl and Big Daddy and the focus was on them instead of Kick-Ass, I think I would have bumped this up to an 8. But I will stick with the 7.
Totally agree. We're on the same page. Same feelings, even though I was laughing at Aaron Taylor Johnson's like follies and failures and stuff like that. I mean, in general, it's good comedy, but you're not really rooting for him by the end of it. You're rooting for Hit Girl, it feels like, and that's kind of what we get at the end. So definitely on board with that score. All
right, let's talk about the villains. So Mark Strong plays Frank D'Amico. I think he's slightly more entertaining here than in Shazam. For my money, I think he gets to be a bit charming. I love the first scene when he's in the limo with his son Chris, and they're kind of talking about like what they're going to get at the movie. I think he actually gets to show some personality. He has a family in this movie, so he's not just twisting his mustache and just being an evil villain. I like the fact that he does karate. We get to see him do some karate, and that kind of pays off at the end. Again, I also think that he has a great death. Mark Strong is used very well by Matthew Vaughn in 3 movies, the 2 Kingsman movies, as well as this one, and I really like him here. And I know that he kind of has been typecast as the heavy in a lot of movies, but I think that the villains still are not great in this movie, but I think Mark Strong brings a lot to this role.
Yeah, I just feel like the first 2 acts, like you were talking about how it builds really well in the third act, the first 2 acts, the villains are not really effective. And then it starts turning on its ear in the third act when everything gets really serious and they start fucking shit up and kill Big Daddy. Spoiler alert, but yeah, this was it's a slow build with the villains because it feels like it's just like jokey mobsters or like a caricature of like a Tony Soprano type. But slowly as things get more serious, Mark Strong gets more serious. He's not really making as many jokes. And then it gets to the point where he's just like everything's on lockdown, to the point where he's like he even murdered. He doesn't even do the dirty work anymore, but he actually murdered an impersonator of Kick-Ass, which is a really great scene because it makes it feel like, like, whoa, this guy's really like, you really pissed this guy off. And then, of course you're not going to kill Kick-Ass in the middle of the movie, but it's just a red herring. But, when even his boss is like, or when even his bodyguards are saying like, wow, you're getting your hands too dirty, what are you doing? Like, it's really getting to him. So I thought that the build up and this, this intensity within him, like wanting to get this kick-ass guy, it builds up really well to the end, and that's why he's like torturing him and just so frustrated because of it's the first 2 acts. Like, he thinks Kick-Ass is killing his men, but it's really Big Daddy and Hit Girl. But it just feels like Kick-Ass to him was just kind of like mocking him and getting away with it. And that's why he was getting more and more pissed off. So I thought the performance of his built up to the third act really well. Except his men were just inept. You know what I mean? Also, there was a little bit of a cameo. He's the director of Dexter Fletcher. He was the director of Rocket Man and the takeover director of the Queen movie, Bohemian Rhapsody. He was actually one of the gangsters. He's the guy who gets crushed in the car. So I thought that was a little nice. I was like, oh, Dexter Fletcher. Look where he was 11 years ago getting crushed in the car. But making that connection with Matthew Vaughn, I guess he learned a lot on set. So. Yeah, and then of course you got McLovin, right, playing the opposite of McLovin here. At first it seemed like he's very much like this Harry Osborn character, and then you don't know if he's going to be a good guy or a bad guy, but he turns out to be a really bad guy at the end. But you almost feel really sympathetic towards him because he just wants to be his father's son. He wants to be part of the family business, and he's about to turn 18, and his father's like, I don't know about that. Mom's kind of like not really caring. But, the father gets really impressed by, McLovin and Red Mist, whatever. So it's a really interesting dynamic. I felt like it really built well with their relationship, except the first 2 acts, it was just kind of lacking. But once it gets to the third act, it gets really well. So I'm going to go with a 6 out of 10. I almost went with a 7, but it just doesn't really hold up until like the last 30 or 45 minutes with their relationship and how it just kind of blossoms, and then you almost kind of feel bad because they bond, and it feels like they don't really bond too much, and then they bond and over mafia stuff. But it's unfortunate that it kind of became this backdoor villain origin story.
Yeah, I kind of like that it also served as a supervillain origin story, and that you are teasing the fact that he is going to be Red Mist in a possible sequel. I think that they kind of did that, and they of course make direct reference to the Joker. I have kind of mixed feelings about Christopher Mintz-Plasse, as I think that he is always going to be McLovin, and it's weird. I think there so many times I think actors get a chance to break away from their characters a lot more than they used to. But unfortunately, I think that he kind of exists in this nebulous space where it was just before peak TV and kind of things. Maybe he could have escaped from the McLovin role, and Superbad being such a big deal for a certain generation of people that I don't think he's ever been able to break away from that. And he has been cast in, Kick-Ass and Kick-Ass 2, and he was in Promising Young Woman as well in kind of a smallish role, but he has never really been able to escape that. And it's kind of unfortunate, but I've never been particularly impressed with him either as a performer necessarily. I think he's okay in this movie. I think he's serviceable, but certainly have never been super impressed. I do like the great Michael Rispoli, who is Big Joe. Michael Rispoli has played this kind of role, playing the heavy, the sidekick, this kind of role. He's done this a million times. He was a gangster in The Sopranos, and The Deuce, and in so many other things. I really like him, and he is definitely someone that I have really enjoyed on a number of HBO projects. And he is someone that I probably did not notice as much in 2010, but I think he's very good. I'm giving this also a 6. I do appreciate the fact that they try to give the villains a little bit more to do here as far as pathos goes, but still, there's already so much going on with trying to tell the origin story of Kick-Ass, telling the story of Hit Girl and Big Daddy. There's no possible way that you're ever going to be able to get a full story for the villains too. So that's why their score is just a 6. Brian, let's get to the story. So, of course, this serves as an origin story for Dave as he becomes ingrained in the world of superheroes and certain elements of crime with the D'Amicos. So one of the things that I thought was really weird to me, Brian, so they introduce, with the D'Amicos and kind of how evil they are, they introduce this idea of this microwave oven that literally cooks people. And they have the scene where they basically blow a person up. They introduced this idea, Brian. It was really strange to me that it didn't really have a payoff. Like, they just burned the warehouse down, but they didn't really pay that aspect of it off. That was weird to me.
To me, it was more of a joke, like a torture kind of joke, like what mechanisms can we find or what machines can we find to torture people. Like, it was almost like to me, it was like a joke on the casino scene. With Joe Pesci, where he's torturing that dude, this motherfucker, I think he had the dude's head and the thing, and he was like crunching it. It felt like one of those scenes where it's just like, oh, it's a mobster torturing a guy for information. It's kind of like a play on that, and they just had some fun with it. So I didn't really expect a payoff when it came to that machine thing, even though it was like, what the fuck is it doing there or anything? But yeah, that was it was very Cronenberg. I'll give it that.
So in addition to that, the action tells a lot of the story. I think it's really solidly done. I think that whenever there's action on the screen, it's good. But when there's not action, there's gay confusion, there's some violence that doesn't totally work for me. And that's the weird thing. So we also have Kick-Ass going viral for an inaccurate video. That seems about right, Brian. I have to say, 11 years later, looking back on the way that Kick-Ass went viral and the fact that he did not really kick those people's asses, but he's still regarded as a superhero, that's something I can see that's very tangible that probably could happen.
Yeah, that's kind of one of those things that kind of like stand out still in this viewing. 11 years later, is this whole social media thing that goes on with Kick-Ass, and like he says MySpace followers and shit like that, but of course shit's evolved then, and there was not even Twitter. Well, technically I think there was Twitter, but it wasn't a thing. Like, it wasn't as big. But yeah, of course today would have been Twitter and Facebook and all that thing, Instagram. But yeah, it was a good like preview or prelude of what's to come in the 10 years of that decade, of the last decade of what social media was. So yeah, it was very like, wow, he was on top of that. Like, that's very accurate. And like, they could have done a lot more with it, but they just didn't know at the time. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like if they do like Kick-Ass now as like the first story, redo it now, there would be so much more with the social media aspect, and they could have done a lot more with that.
So of course, I think the part of the movie that bothers me the most is the idea of Kick-Ass being even a somewhat competent fighter. Seems absurd based on what we know about Dave, and even the way that they shoehorn him in at the end of the movie, it literally just feels like they put him on a jetpack at the end to shoot all those dudes, just because he doesn't really know how to do anything else. And I think that fundamentally that is why the movie doesn't really work for me. Like I said, I think the movie is so much better when the concentration is not on him, and the way that he is introduced in in kind of the climax of the movie, because of course he's the one that is supposedly the major character, and it just almost feels like he gets forgotten at one point, and we got to bring Kick-Ass in. So I think that's why this story is kind of a mixed bag for me. I'm going with a 6 on this, and I think a lot of it has to do with the issues with the main character. just in the way the scenes with Katie are portrayed. Like, if you notice, we didn't really talk about Katie that much because she's not really a character. She is just a love interest and just a girlfriend. And it sucks because I think they do a lot of really potentially interesting things with Chloe Moretz as Hit Girl and her being independent and her being able to kick ass herself. But then you have this other female character, really the only major female character in the movie, and all she is arm candy.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. And it's kind of sucks because she probably had more. I feels like there was more to it with the storyline with her and like whatever that drug dealer's name was, and there was some weird stuff going on there. So I don't know what was going on there, but there seems to be more to her story that they kind of just maybe there was left on the cutting room floor or whatever. But deleted scenes and whatnot. That's kind of unfortunate. But I feel like the Hit Girl Big Daddy stuff is just so good and compelling that it kind of outweighs the kick-ass stuff for sure. So much so that I'm willing to give it a 7 just because I think their story is so great. I love that they did that little animated comic book birth in the middle of it all, and you see Nicolas Cage's character drawing in the background, stuff like that, and the relationship he has with his partner. I loved how they touched on that, and the stuff about you're robbing your girl of a childhood, all those little things, all the psychological implications of raising a little girl to be a murderer, all those things. And then I think the line that kind of gets me the most, and it's so obscure and weird, but it kind of hit me this time around, is when he asked her, "What do you want for your birthday?" and she lists all these girly toys and stuff, and Big Daddy's just sitting there shocked, like, "What?" And then she's like, "I'm kidding, Daddy. I want this weapon or whatever." And you can tell like she really wants the toys, but she doesn't have the heart to tell her dad what she really wants, and that's kind of the nature of their relationship. And I feel like that's kind of some powerful stuff right there, that even at 10 years old, she's willing to sacrifice like a lie like that of what she really wants just to make her dad happy. You know what I mean? Stuff like that I thought was just really like, okay, there's some deeper stuff going on here. And it's just not the kick-ass stuff that's just kind of weak, but that's why, you feel, and I feel too, like the movie should have been more about them. But again, you have to stay loyal to the comic a little bit. That would have been kind of disservicing the kick-ass who are the fans of the kick-ass comic. So I'm going to go with a 7 just because I felt like the stuff like that's kind of what draws me to Kick-Ass the most in terms of the story.
So yeah, I mean, I feel very satisfied with giving it a 6 just because I do have those mixed feelings. I think the technical aspects of this movie, though, as we go into the next category, that's where I feel like this is where the movie is the strongest. I think Matthew Vaughn has a very good sense of style, the way that he positions the camera, the way he moves the camera. I love the color palette. I think the movie looks great and embraces kind of this both real life at some points, but also not afraid to give Hit Girl purple hair, and his costume is very green, and they're not muting the colors, and I really, really appreciate that. The Hit Girl action scene, I think, is genuinely one of the best action scenes in a superhero movie that's ever been put together. There is a lack of reliance on CGI that I really appreciate, that I wish we could get back into with a lot of other comic books. But for me, I think this movie really works on the technical level. The screenplay certainly has some issues, but I think that this movie is very well edited. I'm giving this an 8.
I'm going to go with a 9 just because I feel like, a small budget and turning a small budget and making it look like 3 or 4 times what it is, that's a special talent, and I feel Matthew Vaughn has that talent a lot. And like some of the best parts of X-Men First Class were just not even the action sequences. I felt like he's able to turn simple scenes and make them interesting, like simple basic stuff, and film it interesting ways and make it interesting, I feel. And like he does that a lot, and the music choice. And to me, the standout action sequence is Big Daddy annihilating those dudes in the warehouse and setting it on fire, and the one camera is able to pick it up. But they play that music, man. I don't know what it's called, that piece of music, but it's also used in another movie called Smoking Aces. I don't know if you've seen that with Jeremy Piven and Ben Affleck and all these random cameos, but they play that music at the end when Ryan Reynolds kills, spoiler alert, Jeremy Piven's character, and it just plays really well. So I don't know if he was a fan of that movie. I think it was directed by Joe Carnahan or something. But I don't know if he was just such a fan of that song that he reused it here, because it's still like rocks. And like that scene is just so, to me, like that's the one scene I remember the most from Kick-Ass, is him and that music and just annihilating everybody and just dropping the gun at the end. Like just great stuff. So For me, like it's totally a 9 out of 10, and I don't know, like I feel like he's such a great visual director that I want him to branch out more. Like I said, maybe some Star Wars stuff, maybe some more sci-fi stuff. But I guess once he's done with the Kingsman thing, like I hopefully it's a trilogy and just be done with it. Because by the end of the second Kingsman movie, I did feel like okay, well, there's kind of no more story to tell here. We've done all the James Bond stuff, we've done all the fun stuff, and he did another one. So I was kind of like, okay, I'll watch it, even though it's just the same old. But I love his style, so I want him to branch out more for sure.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate that just like so many other directors, he gets involved with these franchises, and that's kind of what he is married to. I would definitely love to see him expand into something else and do other action movies or maybe even other genres. But so assessing the legacy of this movie, I think it was something that was very popular in 2010, and I think it stole the show in a lot of ways. But I think that this movie, the legacy has been hurt undoubtedly by some of the story elements that I don't think work. The sequel is terrible, probably one of the worst, probably one of the biggest drop-offs from first movie to second movie that we could ever discuss on this podcast. I also think the fact that we have had so many other superhero movies from the MCU, from the DCEU, and even a show like The Boys, I think kind of mutes the effect that this movie has had. And quite honestly, I mean, you can't really blame the movie for this, but I don't think any of the actors have really excelled as much as they should have. And it's weird to me because, yes, Chloe Moretz is in a Tom and Jerry movie, but she's also in a Tom and Jerry movie. And, I mean, she's getting a paycheck, but is that really the best thing that she could be doing right now? And Aaron Taylor Johnson was in Tenet, but, I mean, he's almost unrecognizable in that movie, and he really has not had the best possible career. So, yeah, it's really interesting to me. Had a really hard time coming up with the score for this one. So I'm coming down, I'm sure you're going to give this higher, but I'm giving this a 6.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with a 7 only because of like the domino effect of it all. Like their careers, like Aaron Taylor Johnson and Chloe Moretz, is just like they're not as high as they should be, but they're still young. They're still young, and they still got a lot of time. Like he was in Godzilla, he was Pietro. It just feels like he just wanted to do smaller stuff. And Chloe Moretz, maybe she just wanted to she wasn't Let the Right One In, and that's got some rave reviews, and I've yet to see that movie, but I've heard rave reviews about her performance in that. Maybe she just kind of like wanted to do some other stuff, because if you look at her filmography, it's not like major award-winning stuff, but at the same time she was going through like middle school and high school in the last 10 years, right? So maybe that's why, and maybe maybe this is going to be her decade, and maybe she just chose like the Tom and Jerry thing to just make a quick paycheck, and now from there she'll go from whatever. But for me, just this landed Matthew Vaughn the role in First Class, and if you look at the writing credit for Days of Futures Past, he's credited as a story or one of the story writers. So I would not be surprised if he had more of an influence on Days of Futures Past than we think in terms of the story. But him landing that gig in First Class, like, I think it's crucial because that brought X-Men back. Everyone thought it was dead. We had back-to-back shitty movies with X-Men 3 and then Origins. And then when you hear First Class, I was like, I don't know, man. What are we doing here? And then when I heard it's Matthew Vaughn right after I saw Kick-Ass, I was like, this is going to be great because this guy gets action. And I was right. I was totally right. And I called that one. So 7 out of 10 for me in terms of his legacy, because this launched his career, it feels like. Even though, like I said, like I saw Layer Cake, which is an independent British UK crime drama, whatever. And then Stardust, which is kind of like, a mid-level family movie that had a certain budget that didn't really branch out and be a big hit. Like, this was his big hit, and it launched him. So it felt like this was a big domino effect for him.
So my total score is a 33.
36, not too far off. I'm more positive about it, but like the story elements we're both kind of in agreement on. But I just feel like I'm such a Matthew Vaughn mark that I probably liked it more. So
Yes, you are definitely a Matthew Vaughn mark. Let's get to the burning questions. Brian, I'm going to change this first one for you. Would this movie have been better off if it was only about Hit Girl and Big Daddy?
Yeah, we're probably looking at a score of like 42, 41, something like that. Because the story would have been much better, and it would have complemented more. So, and I think the legacy might have been better too. Because I think if you would have given more time, you could have pushed for like a best supporting actor for Nick Cage kind of thing, because he was almost on that level. He's not so crazy. He's tame. So I think he probably could have pushed for something, because Lionsgate is one of those companies anyway that kind of pushes for those awards. So if they can.
On a scale of 1 to Face Off, what level of Nicolas Cage are we getting here?
See, I would say a 6. Even though he's doing the weird accent when he's getting burned alive, which he sounds like he's doing like that army sergeant from Full Metal Jacket. It sounds like that's what he's doing. And then his cadence and the way he's talking, it's not so super weird. Like we've seen Nick Cage do weirder stuff. So I've definitely got to go with a 6. Like he's kind of coming off the heels of National Treasure 2, I think. So that's not too crazy, Nick Cage. And I think knowing he was kind of normal, so this is around that era. So yeah, definitely a 6 out of 10 on the face-off scale.
Yeah, he's pretty close to The Rock, Con Air, kind of that level of Nicolas Cage. He's not going full face-off. He's not even really Charlie Kaufman in Adaptation. He's almost somewhat normal for a good portion of this movie. So I would almost agree with you. Would you have expected bigger careers for Aaron Taylor Johnson and Chloe Moretz based off of this movie? And of course, they are both young enough to still potentially have careers. And they're both still in movies, so it's not like they're completely devoid. But I guess for me, I would have expected these two to be headlining major movies more often and better movies more often.
I kind of expected Chloe Moritz more to be, because she was the best performance, for sure, for me. I kind of expected her to be like, I don't know, almost to the level of almost being nominated for an Oscar at this point, but was she nominated for an Oscar? I don't think so. Let the Right One In, like I said, it was very highly touted for her performance in that. But again, going through high school and middle school, she probably had some different focuses, obviously. So I still think she's got the talent for that. She just got to find the right role and director, because at 10 years old, man, she was just into it, and she got the core idea of the character and that idea that this character is an adult really quick and had to age really quick, and she got that. So I feel like she's got a lot more talent. I haven't watched Tom and Jerry. I don't plan to watch Tom and Jerry. It's just, I like the idea of animation and live action mixed together, but Tom and Jerry's just really not my thing. I feel like, I don't know. Give me some dialogue. I need dialogue with the two.
All right. Did you know Matthew Vaughn was married to Claudia Schiffer? Because I did not.
No, but good for him, man. Good for him.
That's yeah, that was something else. We of course did a Matthew Vaughn movie before, but I didn't realize it until this time because it was in some of the trivia. So that was weird. What happened with the sequel, Brian?
Okay, this sounds crazy, but this is the theory I've formulated. So even though the sequel came out 3-4 years later, I still think it was too soon. I think that you should have waited like 10 years. The sequel should have came out now, and it would have been so much more interesting, because you got a grown-up hit girl, aging kick-ass that probably wants to forget his past, and Red Mist dealing with the fact that he's probably got his own kid now and can't be the father that he wanted his father to be to him. Something like that. I think it would have made more sense now, because I get they wanted to tell the story of hit girl in high school, right? And that's an intriguing story, but it just doesn't work for the movie they gave us. And Jim Carrey was, I don't know. I just don't know. I see Jim Carrey and I think of John Cena as Peacemaker, and I just don't know. I just don't know.
The fact that Matthew Vaughn did not direct the sequel, I think, is a lot of why the second one did not work. But maybe at some point we will get back to it and review it, but I really, really dislike that movie. And it will probably end up in the pile of shame, because I really detest a lot of the stuff that they did with Hit Girl, and I really hated, just with a fiery passion, what they did towards the end of the movie with Hit Girl and Kick-Ass together. So yeah, the sequel sucks, and I think a lot of it is because they really wanted a sequel because this movie was such a big deal. They either didn't want Matthew Vaughn to direct or weren't patient enough for him to direct, so you ended up with a piece of garbage. And it's really unfortunate, because I think this could have been a really interesting franchise where you could have really explored these characters, and especially even bringing back Red Mist for a second movie, I think could have been really interesting. And it just wasn't. The second movie is bad. Speaking of bad movies, Brian, we're gonna be talking about another bad one. I don't know if it's bad. It's definitely not great. We're going to be talking about Constantine next week, so you're going to fire up your HBO Max accounts and watch Constantine with us. Brian, I've never seen Constantine. I have seen the character portrayed in Legends of Tomorrow and some of the CW shows, but I have never watched this version, and I'm very intrigued to do so because it's Keanu Reeves, and I'm not sure. Keanu Reeves is, of course, a national treasure. Not the movie, but he's an actual national treasure. But I've got a bad feeling about this movie. It's one of those movies that came out in the 2000s where they were just trying to fire up every superhero they could, and I don't think it's going to work out too well, Brian.
It's amazing to me that I didn't even think of this for the podcast until like last week when I DM'd you like, hey, they just added this to HBO Max, and I just realized that it's DC and that Constantine was just in the crossover of the CW. So like, yeah, it makes perfect sense that we should review this. And Keanu Reeves, yeah, we'll see. Because at this point, we can talk about it, but I'm a Matrix Reloaded fan. Not much so Revolutions, but I like Reloaded a lot. And I felt like he did a good job in that. And years later, it feels like retroactively people are shitting on Reloaded. So it's a weird situation. And this was like right after that, you know what I mean? And I was one of those people that argue that he can act. And I felt like in this movie, I don't know, because I've seen parts of it on TV. I've never seen the whole thing. Like I've seen parts of it on TV and never the whole thing. I've seen good parts of it, but I'm just not sure if I think that he's a good actor in this or not. We'll talk about it next week. It's weird.
And we get to talk about Digimon Hansu once again.
Wow, yeah. So what? Shazam, Captain Marvel, Constantine, Guardians of the
Constantine. Tilda Swinton is also in Constantine as well. Shia LaBeouf, Rachel Weisz. What a cast!
Yeah, what a cast indeed. So I'm really looking forward to it because, like, again, it totally slipped our minds. I don't know how. As much as popular this movie is, it slipped our minds. So
it did, and we will be discussing this next week. So for Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week to discuss Constantine.
Is that a bazooka?